You, I'm gonna put on the. You're gonna make it to his. Okay. Good evening, everybody. Welcome. A good chodesh to us all. Aksivach Simatova, Ashana Tova Masuka. I want to first of all thank Rabbi Zippel Kramer for planning this this unbelievable program, as they do all the other programs, Baruch Hashem at Chabad, and we have a lot of things coming up in the next couple of weeks. But tonight, it's my great honor to introduce to you to Rabbi Zippel. I actually know his father. I think we were together in 770. It could be. I don't know which yeshiva we were together, but actually I've been listening to Rabbi Zippel for already a couple of times, and the truth is, I don't know what you want to call Rabbi Avremi or Avremi. I don't know what
They all work. They're all accurate. Avremi's just fine.
I wanted to say to you that it's every time I listen to you, I'm inspired, to listen to you again.
Thank you.
Because it's truly amazing, your story, and especially your hayra, your message that you give to people, and that's really I know I want to first apologize to the questions that I'm going to ask you. Because I can't imagine that, brings you back to these kind of situations and the pain and suffering that you went through. And Sabi, these questions bring you back to that situation. But as you have said, and I've heard it many times from you, if I can repeat what you said, that you're doing this to be able to inspire others. And so you're willing, in essence, to go through this so that others could be inspired and to take an unbelievable and to get their own strength to be able to handle their own situations, whatever it might be. So I ask my apologies before I'm going to ask you these questions, and we're all doing this l'shem shamayim, for the sake of heaven. So Rabbi Remy, I want you to start off really your beginning and where you come from. I know you're children of shluchim. I know your father. I don't know your mother, but tell us your beginning. Tell us where this all started, where you started off as a child, and where you brought up, and what kind of a surrounding family you have.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you very much for your warm welcome, Rabbi Bucket. It's actually nice to be back with your community. I was very fortunate to spend Shabbos in West Boca.
Wow.
Almost two and a half years ago at this point. Actually, I'll get to that later on in the story because it has a very special connection to the whole thing, which I don't think anybody here is aware of. But thank you, Rabbi Bucket, and thank you, Rabbi Zippel Kramer, for your very warm invitation. My name is Rabbi Zippel. I have the good fortune of serving as a Chabad rabbi here in Salt Lake City, Utah. My parents started Chabad here in Salt Lake City 28 years ago in July of 1992. At that point, the Rebbe was turning 90 in April of 92, and Chabad's gift to the Rebbe for his 90th birthday was the opening of a new state, and Utah was chosen to be that new state, and my parents were chosen to be the ones to open Chabad here in Salt Lake City. And at that point, when they moved out here, I was just shy of my first birthday. They were kind enough to bring me along for the ride. Actually, my first birthday party was the first Chabad event that ever took place here in Salt Lake City. It was just about a week after they moved. It was a nice way to meet new people. And I'm the oldest of six. I grew up here on the job. I think like a lot of kids who grow up in Chabad houses and who grow up, the sons and daughters of Chabad rabbis and rebbitzins, you learn very quickly that the lines, if they exist at all, the lines between, home and work are very, very, very blurred. And it's a really all-encompassing experience being the child of a Chabad rabbi. And, different kids react to that differently. For me, it was something which I took to instantly and I loved, and it was something that I was very fortunate to have part of my life. And even as a kid, I loved getting involved in the Chabad house to the best of my ability. And I think from a very young age, it was something which I dreamed that one day I would be able to do on my own, not just be the child of a shliach, be the son of a Chabad rabbi in Rebbetzin, but to become a Chabad rabbi in my own right. And I grew up, I left home after bar mitzvah to go to yeshiva. I got a little bit of an education. And in 2014, I met my wife, we got married. My wife is the daughter of a Chabad rabbi in Rebbetzin in Palo Alto, California. And, she also had this lifelong dream to live that life on her own. And we moved out here almost 6 years ago in the winter of 2014. We moved out here to work with the younger segment of the community here in Salt Lake City, primarily with young professionals. And Baruch Hashem, for my wife and I think it's we have the mentality that we're fortunate enough to live our dream. For both of us, this was a lifestyle that we were very passionate about, and it's something that we're tremendously thankful for and grateful and appreciative that we have that ability to live that life every single day. Rabbi, I think you're muted.
That was a fast synopsis from the beginning to the end. But let's start off. When this whole thing started, how what age you were, and when this whole before that in 2018 you went to press charges. But let's start off how and when this started.
So, I'm the oldest of six, as I mentioned before. We were all born pretty close together. In 1998, my parents were expecting my youngest brother, who's number 5 in the family. And both back then, when I was being raised here in Salt Lake City, and even now until today, there really is no formal Jewish educational infrastructure here in Salt Lake. There's no day school, there's no cheder, there's no school for you to send your Jewish sons and daughters. And so my siblings and I were homeschooled. Nowadays, the term homeschool has, many very liberal applications, and it can mean any number of things. And now kids are going back to school, and some are going to be hybrid schooled and homeschooled and part Zoom schooled. Back when I was a kid, homeschooled meant homeschooled. I mean, we had a room in our house, a converted bedroom that was a classroom. My parents taught us, and we were literally homeschooled. My parents were expecting number 5, and my father was out most of the day doing whatever it is the Chabad rabbi does on a daily basis, and my mom was home with us. And so my parents thought it would be a wise idea that summer to get full-time help, to have an extra set of hands around the house, to have a full-time nanny around the house. And so that summer they inquired, and they found someone who came very highly recommended by actually a few different families here in the community. And my parents hired her, to be their full-time help here at home. And the following summer, in 1999. Just after my 8th birthday, our family's nanny began sexually abusing me. And this would go on for a very, very long time. Actually, in totality, it would go on for just about 10 years, almost exactly 10 years. It ended in 2009, right around my 18th birthday. At that point, most of my siblings and I had grown up. We were no longer at home. We were attending yeshiva in high school and whatever it was out of state, and there wasn't that pressing need to have somebody else at home. And so my parents, obviously not knowing about anything that was going on, that was a very, very passionate decision that I had made, that this was going to be my secret that I was going to take to the grave with me. On very amicable terms, parted with our babysitter, and everyone went their own way. And the decision that I had made when this had all started, that this was going to be something that I would never, ever tell anybody about, for a variety of reasons that I'm happy to talk about. I was happy to continue that mentality and really never tell anybody about it. And obviously it wasn't going to continue anymore, but it was going to remain my secret. I grew up, I got married. I actually had my first child.
How did you survive those years between 2009 and 2018?
How did I survive them? Well, that's a great question, and one I guess is split up into parts. The first 5 years or so of those years, I survived to the best of my ability that I had been putting one foot forward in front of the other every single day of my life until that point. I survived by waking up every day and hating myself in a certain sense, and forcing myself not to think about it, and convincing myself that if I thought about it less, it would go away and it wouldn't affect me. And the less emotional attention that I gave it, it would stop bothering me. And that was it. This was going to be the reality that I was going to live with forever. And there would come a day where I would just stop thinking about it. And if I would stop thinking about it, it wouldn't affect me. I was convinced that it was one of those things that it only bothers you if you think about it. So if you just stop thinking about it, it wouldn't bother you. I think we all know as human beings and as adults that that's not quite how life works. And when there is, trauma and scarring and different situations in life that we go through, they don't just stop affecting us because we've made the decision to stop thinking about them. As I grew up and as I, have had my own child and really started to venture into adulthood, I think that a lot of the issues that, this trauma left me with really began to crop up in some very tangible ways. In the winter of 2016, my parents and my wife, who were really starting to notice shifts in behavior, shifts in attitude, I was not in a good place, mentally, emotionally. They strongly suggested that I see a therapist. They didn't really know what was going on with me. In fact, they had no idea what was going on with me. and they suggested that I go and see a therapist. And I was very hesitant about the idea. I was convinced that the therapist wouldn't understand anyway, and he was going to be no good. But my wife is a very powerful Jewish woman who knows how to assert her will, and my mother's a very powerful Jewish woman who knows how to assert her will. And so I went to see the therapist, and he was the first human being on the face of this earth that I ever said the words to. I said, I think I was sexually abused as a child, and that began a path of healing. And Rabbi Book, to answer your question, it began a very different path of healing than the years leading up to that. It began a path of recognition and understanding and really grappling with and accepting and trying to come to terms with what had happened to me and how that affects my life on a very regular basis moving forward. I want to kind of jump through the story a little bit, and I'll get back to some of the emotional turmoil a little bit later. But to me, it's important to share this detail because I think even the people involved till today don't know about it. I started seeing my therapist in February 2016, and once we really kind of started jumping through the initial hoops together, a very, very prominent question that kept on coming up was, what am I going to do about it? Do I want to go to the police? Do I want to write my abuser a letter? Do I want to share with her at all that I've, realized what's happened to me? And for me, the main guiding factor in any decision that I was going to or not going to make was my privacy and my confidentiality. I was not going to make a single decision that would potentially put my name out there, that would expose me for who I was. I was comfortable with my therapist knowing about it, and my wife and my parents, and that's about it. Nobody else needed to know about this part of my life. And that was really kind of my guiding factor. Whatever I could do to protect my privacy, I would be okay with. But if there was a chance that my name would get out, it was a no-go. And my therapist kept on urging me. He kept on telling me, why don't you sit down and speak to somebody who knows how the situation would play out? Speak to a former prosecutor, speak to somebody who's been through the legal system, who knows about it from the inside, and just find out your options, educate yourself, inform yourself, know what you could possibly do. When I started therapy, my therapist was very adamant that whilst I was dealing with all these powerful emotions, it was a good idea for me to have an outlet, particularly a physical outlet. And so one of the things that I decided to do, I was a little bit heavy and out of shape at that point, was I decided to start running. Well, once I decided to start running, I'm a bit of a competitive guy. I found out that the best amateur marathon in the country takes place in Miami. The Miami Marathon takes place the last Sunday in January every single year. And so in 2017, I went to Miami and I ran the Miami Half Marathon. And I decided that a year later, I was going to push myself and do the full. And so in January of 2018, I flew down to Miami to run the full Miami Marathon. I had a beautiful Shabbos with your community. The Kramers were gracious enough to host me. And in my book, and I'll never forget, I had to explain to you, you really struggled with the concept that I flew to Florida to run 26 miles. First of all, why was I running 26 miles in the first place? And if I was going to run 26 miles, I couldn't run 26 miles in my own city. Why I flew to Florida to do it, but I did. And I spent Shabbos in West Boca, and Sunday, in the middle of the night, Motzei Shabbos, I ran the Miami Marathon, and that was Sunday. And Monday, I was scheduled to go home. I had put on Facebook that I was in Miami running the marathon, and there is a good friend of mine who splits his time between Salt Lake City and Miami. He's an attorney, and he was in Miami that weekend, and he saw that I was on Facebook, that I was in Miami, and so he sent me a message and he says, "Oh, you're in Florida. Why don't we go grab lunch? Before you go to the airport." He's always wanted to take me out to lunch, and in Salt Lake City, that's not an option. There's no restaurants here. So why don't we go grab lunch on your way to the airport, on your way to Fort Lauderdale? And so Monday, the day after the marathon, my friend and I went out for lunch in Aventura, and we were sitting and schmoozing and just kind of killing time. And I knew that my friend was an attorney. He's a personal injury attorney. And in the middle of the conversation, he made a comment about something in life that he had learned when he was a prosecutor. When he had come out of law school, he had been a prosecutor straight out of law school. And at that moment, this light bulb in my head goes off. I found someone that I can bring this up to. So I sat there, I said, by the way, you mentioned you're a prosecutor. I was too scared to attach this to myself. I said, there's a person in my community who has been through all these experiences, and he's considering pressing charges, and he's concerned about his confidentiality. What can you tell me about this process? And he walked me through the whole process, how it would work. And he told me quite confidently that at least in the beginning, this person's confidentiality would be protected. And I walked out of the restaurant in Aventura and I said, okay, I am going to do this. I flew to Salt Lake City that night, and the next morning I called the police. On January 30th, 2018, I filed a police report, and it all kind of snowballed from there. So, ladies and gentlemen, you see what spending a Shabbos in West Boca can do. It can change your life in the most impactful of ways. I can attest to that personally. But anyways,
we left a couple of chaims.
Exactly. It was quite the kiddush that Shabbos in West Boca. But anyways, I called the police. An investigation ensued. 2 months later, my abuser was arrested on 130 counts of sexual abuse of a child. She was ultimately charged with 7 felonies. She was prosecuted and she was found guilty over a 4-day criminal trial last November. And she's currently doing 25 years to life at the Utah State Prison in Draper. As part of this process,
what got you to get public?
As part of this process, in February 2019, the prosecutor had made clear to me that there was going to come a time where I was going to have to testify, not at the trial, with what goes earlier called the preliminary hearing. And once I was going to have to testify in open court, at that point, there was no guarantees anymore. There was no assurances that I could be kept private. It would remain confidential. It's open court. Anybody can come in, anybody can hear, anybody can report on what's going on in the courtroom. And so in February of 2019, the reality that that I was going to testify and that I might have to go public with this really became a reality. And instead of letting someone find out from being in the courtroom, I began to entertain the possibility of being public about this, of owning the story, of publicizing it on my own terms, and really being proud of what happened. I wouldn't say being proud, but being okay with what happened and being okay with that being my story. I remember there was a very powerful episode that took place leading up to that. It was about a month or so, a couple months before this hearing. And at that point, I was really torn about the idea of going public or not going public. And one night I decided, I don't know why I'm banging my head in the wall and making myself crazy. Why don't I find someone who I can talk to? Why don't I find someone in this world who's been through what I've been through, is observant, is maybe even better if they're part of Chabad, as a male survivor of sexual abuse, and let me find out from them what it's like. So I sat down that night at my house and I took out my laptop and I Googled male observant Jewish survivor of sexual abuse. And after about 10 minutes, it became abundantly clear to me that Google certainly knew of nobody who fit that description. And Google usually has a pretty good handle of what's going on in the world. And if Google thinks that such a thing, I'm sorry, hang on a second. If Google thinks that that such a thing doesn't exist, then I was pretty sure that such a thing didn't exist. And so I remember at that moment, that reality being a little bit sad, that I had nobody to talk to, I had nobody to bounce this off of, I had nobody to, no kindred spirit to be able to share this with. But I remember it being oddly empowering. And I remember thinking to myself, I know how much I would appreciate in this moment having somebody to talk to and to have their counsel. What if everything in life happened for me to become that person, to be that figure for somebody else? What if there's somebody else out there that would appreciate to have somebody in this lifetime to be able to talk to about their experiences, and I could fill that role for them? And ultimately, that was the motivation. I went public in February of 19. Since then, my story has been publicized quite significantly, and for me, it's become the greatest blessing to be able to to fill that role and to serve as someone who can be there for others and help others in a way that I wished somebody could have been there for me one day, long ago. Ended up being for me the most powerful and uplifting thing in the world, and it's something which I'm ultimately very grateful for.
Well, you said you both are married, you have kind of children. Your wife was on board right away to get involved in this whole process.
A few months ago, we were speaking with somebody locally about that conversation with my wife, telling my wife that I had been abused for years as a kid. And we were trying to share with this person in our community how far-fetched that was to share that with my wife. And so, we settled on the reality that it would have been more plausible for me to tell my wife that in the 22 years before I knew her, I had been a very accomplished astronaut. And I had gone on several trips to the moon. That would have been easier in a certain sense and more sensible for my wife to hear than for her to understand that I had been sexually abused for 10 years prior to meeting her. Before I came forward, I thought that this didn't exist in our community, and my wife thought this doesn't exist in our community. And so it was quite the pill for her to swallow. And along this path, I'm a firm believer that everyone who's affected by this issue and everyone who goes through this embraces and engages in their own path of recovery and deals with it on their own terms. And this has been quite the journey for my wife as well to deal with this and to come back from this together with me. But she's been a remarkable source of strength, and she's definitely been at my side and on board with it. And through all of it, I deal with what I have to deal with, and she deals with what she has to deal with, and we all deal with that together. But there's no way I could be where I am today without her, and it's something which I'm tremendously grateful for, that she has made the decision to be a part of this.
I actually heard your mother say that she's the hero of this story.
My mother said that, and my mother's right about that. Absolutely, it was. I firmly believe that as well.
If you can give me, what was the most powerful time in this whole story, in coming out and expressing yourself, and ultimately going to court, in a real public manner, and what was the most empowering moment for you in this whole journey?
It's a very good question in my book, and I think of all the talks I've done, no one really hit the nail on the head quite like you. I think the most powerful moment was realizing that at the end of the day, we're all human beings in this together, and really understanding and seeing that everybody has what they're going on with. Everyone has something they're dealing with. And ultimately, people appreciate sincerity, people appreciate being genuine, and people appreciate and respect and understand human beings who are fully cognizant and aware and respectful of the fact that they are going through the human experience just like everybody else. For years, I was terrified of anybody, of a single token human being alive, knowing about this story because of what it would say about me. What would it say about me, that I was this scarred and broken and deficient human being, and that I had been through all of this, and it's not just in the Jewish world, in the world at large, it's not a very openly and commonly spoken about topic for men. It's something which obviously men struggle with speaking about, and I was deeply afraid of how would this reflect on me as a human being, that I went through this as a kid. Even in the process of coming forward, I remember when the local reporter that I worked with on the initial story, my coming forward in public, we spoke for many, many hours. And the night before she published a story, which was the night before I was supposed to testify, she was fact checking her story with me. She was reading back to me the quotes that were going to go into the story. And I remember I was really annoyed and disturbed and a little bit concerned with the quotes that she had chosen to put in the story were really, vulnerable, for lack of a better term. And I felt like she could have, told the story in just in a larger picture setting, and didn't really have to go into the nitty gritty of it. And I remember she said to me that night, she says, just let me do my thing. I'm the journalist, you say the words, I print them, and let's all do our job. And I remember in the weeks after the story was published, people who reached out and came forward as a result of the story, really relating and feeling like it was those, painful, vulnerable sentences that spoke to them. And I think that, that experience, which is something which I'm, grateful to be able to live through on a regular basis. I'm tremendously fortunate, and I have a huge chus to be able to deal with people who, are dealing with all sorts of stuff on a regular basis, and seeing people embrace themselves, love themselves, accept themselves with all of their flaws and with everything that they've been through and with everything that they've been scared of the world knowing about them, has been such a beautiful experience to really realize the beauty that lays within each and every human being, and the ability that the world has to appreciate and understand people for who they are, with their struggles, with their flaws, with their experiences, with their challenges. I think that in a very big sense has been, the most uplifting and empowering part of the entire experience.
Oh, I think that answer gives me for a good verbringen. It gives me for a good. It's truly amazing, these, and as I said, I heard you before. It's just truly amazing the way you express these situations. I want you also to express your relationship with the Eibishter. And was there any, we're all humans, and even though you're a shliach and a son of a shliach, I'm sure you struggled with God in this whole situation. And if you can tell us your struggles and the outcome of your struggles.
So universally, human beings who go through childhood sexual trauma, regardless of where they are on the spectrum of religions or affiliations or beliefs, deal with a tremendous amount of self-loathing. There's a very intense amount of blame and shame and guilt, which we assign to ourselves And that was very, very prevalent in my case. On a very basic level, when I was a kid, I didn't understand, and even through my teenage years, I didn't understand that what was happening to me would qualify as sexual abuse. In my mind, as a child, sexual abuse needed to have the very important component of coercion, of pain and suffering, and it needed to be done by somebody who was physically harming a child. And in my mind, it was impossible that sexual abuse could happen at the hands of a caretaker, could happen at the hands of someone who was entrusted with the care of the child, who had a very positive and warm and loving relationship with the child. It didn't really fit the box. And so as a result of that, from the age of 8 and on, I was pretty convinced that what was happening was my fault, for lack of a better term, in plain and simple English. And if it was my fault, that made me a pretty immoral human being. And as a result of that, I spent the better part of my childhood and into my teenage years being pretty adamantly convinced that God hated me. And I know that sounds childish. If you think about it, it was a reality that was born into the mind of a child. But, I was convinced that at least half the blame lay at my feet. And these were issues that were my fault, at least part of it. And as a result of that, I was a really substandard human being, and the Almighty God was perfectly justified in hating me and hating my existence and hating what I was doing. And God and I had a pretty complicated relationship over those years. I was pretty convinced of that reality. And I think that I remained convinced of that until I went to therapy. And when I went to therapy, I began to understand that what had happened to me was abuse. And it wasn't my fault, and I couldn't consent, and I didn't consent, and all of the things they preach to you in therapy. Once I began understanding that, I think that actually went to a far more painful place on the map. Instead of thinking that this was my fault, and these were things that I had done, and as a result of that, God was entitled to hate me, I really began to feel like God had forsaken me. I mean, understanding that this was abuse and I had been abused as a child really led me to wonder and to question aloud, what kind of God allows children to be abused? What kind of God is okay with an 8-year-old boy having his childhood taken away from him, and then that goes on and is perpetuated for years and years after it? What kind of God is okay with that? And specifically the God that we learn about in Chassidus, and the God that we believe in as rabbis, the all-knowing, all-capable, all-powerful, the Rabbeinu Shalom that we're familiar with, who knows everything and can do everything. What, just sat by and watched this happen and was okay? I mean, where was he? Where was he when all this was going on? As the years went along, I realized that that's a question which I'll never really have an answer to. That's the same question that the parents whose kids are in the pediatric oncology ward ask. And that's the same question that every human being that ever has gone through any sort of pain and suffering in this world asks. And I think that pain and suffering is a pretty common human experience. We all have those moments where we wonder where God is and why isn't he stepping in and being a part of what's going on right now. But I think what was helpful for me and really crucial in kind of patching up and repairing my relationship with God was having the ability to see something good and positive and productive come about as a result of my experiences. And having the ability to see that God sometimes works through you in the most mysterious ways, and specifically in ways that you never in a million years envisioned that would be your role to play in this world. And that's how God envisions you making a difference in this world. That's what God had in mind for you. That was a powerful experience. And to be able to see that my experiences, painful as they may be, and I'll never know why I had to go through what I went through in order for some good in this world to happen. But the reality is that has happened. There's been some measure of goodness and positivity and healing that's been brought to a great number of people as a result of my experiences. That really has been crucial and essential in patching up that relationship and giving me the ability to see that whatever God has intended for me in life has been according to his plan and in accordance with his wishes. And it's really gone a long way in helping that healing process.
I want to just actually jump in here with a quick question.
Sure.
Remy, look, this is something that, you feel somebody, I know you since we were kids. We actually met up in Miami for the International Chidon HaMitzvahs in grade, right? I believe you were representing Utah, and I came in. What?
New Jersey. I was there for my last year of Cheder.
Okay, so you were in school in New Jersey and you came, and I was from Montreal, and we came and we actually met up in Miami, and actually Rabbi Bookett came to visit me in the hotel in Miami. I don't know if you remember Rabbi Bookett. Getting to my point is I've known you through this time, and I can't even fathom how you were able to compartmentalize this part of your life and the rest part of your, the rest of, I want to know how you did that. And if that skill, if you may say, has come to help you in any other way.
So thank you for that. I appreciate that. Obviously, the people that reacted to the story in the most profound fashion were people like you, Rabbi Maishi, people who knew me when this was going on, all of my high school classmates who knew me, and who knew this and who found out many years later that I was in yeshiva and I was in my studies and I was doing all the good things, and I'd go home and I would be abused for a couple of weeks over Pesach and then come back and for people that it was, how does that work? There was a comment made in my abuser's trial, which I often circle back to, because I think that it was made in malice and it was made out of ignorance, but I think it really speaks to, the perception of this issue. And I think that setting the record straight on this really goes a long way to helping a lot of people. At the end of the trial, my abuser's defense attorney, in his closing statements, as he was trying to convince the jury that none of this had happened, gestured towards me in the courtroom, and he says, typically people who go through childhood trauma suffer from alcoholism, they're drug addicts, their lives are falling apart at the seams. And I was sitting there in the courtroom, and I, did not, thank God, look to be falling apart at the seams. And he says, look at him, he seems just fine to me. And so how can you believe that any of this happened if he, is sitting here in the courtroom in a suit and tie and seems to, have some sliver of his life together? The reality is that people who endure childhood trauma of any kind, people who endure trauma of any kind, deal with inordinate amounts of pain. They deal with lots and lots of pain in their life. They don't know what to do with that pain. The best thing to do with the pain is to process the pain and find a way to release the pain and manage the pain. But most people, until they get the help they need, don't know what to do with that pain. And so for most people, they choose to numb that pain. They choose to mask that pain. For a lot of people, that takes the form of different abuses, whether it's alcohol abuse, substance abuse, drug abuse, any sort of other troubling behavior. Why do people do that? Why is it that people who go through rough childhoods, rough lives, typically end up in AA or in any of those settings? Because they've gone to great lengths to mask pain, to numb pain, to try and tap into something else, to turn off the pain in their life. I found a different way of doing it. And my different way of doing it was waking up every single morning and putting in every effort and beating myself to a pulp to make sure that nobody would find out about it. That was how I numbed my pain. I numbed my pain through religion. I numbed my pain through my studies. I was, thank God, a very successful student. And I think a large part of that came from a very, very unhealthy place. For me, masking my issues and numbing my issues and making sure that no living being on the face of God's good earth should ever know the truth about what I was going through was a form of masking my pain. I would wake up an extra half hour early to learn Chassidus before Seder even started, to mask my pain, to purge myself of the self-loathing and all of the different symptoms that come about as a result of abuse. And I think that, if there's one thing that my story has taught people, and I believe in really accentuating this point quite strongly, is that, survivors of abuse are manifest in every way, shape, and form. And so often we allow, being a survivor of abuse to be something which is kind of an excuse, which we assign to people who are on the fringes of society. Rabbi Moshe, to your point, I'll share with you guys a very, very important conversation that took place in my life. Before I came public totally, there were a few people that I wanted to tell, privately, long before I entertained the idea of going public. There were a few people that I felt like not that I had never lied to them about the abuse, but I felt that them not knowing was almost dishonest of me. They had known me throughout my yeshiva years. They had known me at any phase of my life, and I wanted them to know the real me as I began to accept the real me. So one of them was a mashpia. One of them was one of my mentors in yeshiva, and I had grown very, very close to this person. And I think if there was one person that I almost told, it was him. He was probably the person that I got to like the 3-yard line, and I almost told him but didn't tell him, and I really needed to come clean. So I called him up one day, and I got his attention, and the words all just came tumbling out, and I told him everything about my past, and it was quiet on the other end of the line for like a solid minute. It was a very, very loud silence, and after a minute, I'll never forget. This is someone who, God bless him, is a very talented person. He's not super subtle, and he says, "Wow, this was not the conversation I thought I'd ever have with you." Now, I appreciate that, and I think there was a compliment that he was trying to share as part of that sentiment. Oh, no one would have ever thought that you were the kid who was going to be sexually abused. But I think that hidden in that comment is a perspective that really needs to be corrected. Just because someone is excelling in yeshiva, just because someone is seems to be dealing with their stuff and is representing their school at the international competition of mitzvahs and seems to be doing okay, you can never ever assume or expect that they don't have their demons that they're dealing with beneath the surface. And it's really given me the opportunity, I think my experience is to really look at everyone in that light and be open to the possibility that everyone is coping with something and everyone is dealing with something. And sometimes it's the people who make every effort to not let that be seen about them who are often dealing with the deepest of issues and who are often in a situation where they really, really need that help more than we can ever imagine.
Let me ask you if you can tell us, how do you, especially for parents out there, you're a parent, Baruch Hashem. How did your parents respond, and how should parents respond? Did they respond right? Have you learned, or can you tell us how should a parent respond to such a situation?
So that's a great question.
They're not on the video.
I'm sorry?
They're not on the video. They're not on the Zoom right now, your parents. So.
Yeah, my parents have gone. And
I want to say also that
yeah.
Anybody can ask a question in the chat. And are we going to open up later for questions? Are we going to allow that?
Yes, Rabbi, we're opening up at the end for Q&A.
At the end for questions, okay.
People are actually raising their hand and stuff, and I've been replying to them that we're going to be doing an open Q&A at the end.
Okay, no problem.
So I want to say something quickly, and I'll jump to it later because I think it's very crucial. It's part of the conversation. I told my parents at a time where I had begun to understand through therapy that there was nothing my parents could have done to prevent what had happened to me. And I want to say that again, because I think it warrants repeating. There's nothing my parents could have done to prevent what had happened to me from happening. I was aware of that. I understood that. I began to process that. And it was at that place that I told my parents. And when I shared that with them the first time, I shared it with them with the important disclaimer that I'm sharing with you this information, and I want you to hear it from me. And I will say this 1,000,000 times until I'm blue in the face. I don't blame you. I don't blame you for what happened to you. I bear no ill will, God forbid, no resentment. And you should not blame yourselves, and you should not feel guilty for what happened to me as a kid. Well, as human beings, we know, and as specifically as Jews, we know that guilt is not necessarily the most rational of emotions. And we don't just feel guilty in places where it's socially appropriate or where it makes sense to. Guilt is something which sets in even in instances where we know that it shouldn't be there. And even in situations where we know we shouldn't really feel guilty, we still feel guilty. So obviously, for my parents, their burden that they carry as a result of this whole saga is a tremendous amount of guilt. And as a parent, it could be repeated to you until you're blue in the face that this is not your fault. You shouldn't feel blamed. You shouldn't feel guilty. You will feel guilty. As a parent, nowadays, I know, my kids are growing up kind of hard of that. My foremost responsibility as a human being in this world today is to take care of my kids and make sure that no harm befalls them. And if God forbid some harm were to befall my kids, God forbid, the whole world could yell at me that I shouldn't feel guilty, I will probably still feel guilty. And so I understand that, I understand that's my parents' burden to bear, and I understand that's their journey. And, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of my wife, everyone that is affected by this issue deals with this and has to go through this and has to, recover from it in their own way. And for my parents, their process of dealing with this is dealing with that guilt, that I could yell at them from today till tomorrow that they shouldn't feel guilty. They still feel guilty. And that's really their issue to cope with and to deal with and to handle, every day that they engage in this process. I think as parents, I think that, Rabbi Zippel, you asked specifically how we should, respond to this issue. I think that parents play such an important role in this. And, I'll go back to what I referenced earlier. Obviously, the question that I think I get, in every single one of these conversations is, now that you're a parent, what would you advise, having been through what you've been through, what would you advise to us as parents to make sure that our kids never go through this? My boys are growing up. I have a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old, and now I'm on this side of the fence as a parent. And I tell parents, Oftentimes I'll get asked by people who I'll meet, who know about the story, what can I do to guarantee that my children will never cross paths with a sexual predator? And I'll say to them, and I don't think people like hearing this, but it's the truth and it's what I think. So it's what I'll say. If the only thing that you can do to absolutely guarantee that your children will never cross paths with a predator, there's only one thing you can do. That one thing is you wrap your kids in bubble wrap and you lock them in a closet in your home. That is the only thing that you can do to guarantee that your kids will never cross paths with a predator. Because the reality of the situation is that we know that people who seek to do harm to kids are manifest in society in every way, shape, and form. And they have every sort of background and every sort of profession and every sort of job. And it's impossible to say that, if I'm going to not expose my kids to these sorts of people, then they'll be okay. Then they'll never have to worry. I often share the story. Before the story was public, one of the people that I told in the process leading up to it was a cousin of mine. A cousin of mine, were very close. Him and his wife are a Chabad rabbi and represent on a college campus. And I called him up and I told him the story. And you could hear on the other end of the line, he was very shook up by what he was hearing. And we hung up. And he called me back like 10 minutes later. And he says, Remy, I talked to my wife and we're so shook up about what we heard. And we're so devastated for you. And we're so bothered. I want you to know that our kids have a number of babysitters that interact with them regularly because, we both work in the Chabad house. And because of your story, because of what you told us, I want you to know that in solidarity with you, we called all of our kids' babysitters and we fired them all. Sight on scene. We just got rid of all of them. Bam, bam, bam. Just no more babysitters because we were so traumatized when we heard what happened to you. And again, I think it's a beautiful story and there's a beautiful sentiment contained within, but I chuckle now when I think about it because I appreciate that. And that's definitely one way of making sure that your kids won't be exposed to predators. But if it's not a babysitter, it's a sports coach, or it's a member of the clergy, or it's a member of a family, people who do harm to kids are everywhere. And so there's nothing that we can do to lock our kids up to make sure they never get exposed to someone like that. I feel as parents, though, there is something crucial which we can do to really give our kids the tools to succeed in this issue. And therefore, it's crucial that we do it. And that is to create an environment for our kids, to create a space in our homes and in our kids' lives where they feel that there is no topic on this earth that they should ever feel uncomfortable about speaking to us. There's nothing that they should ever feel that if they were to speak to us about this topic, they will somehow be judged, they will somehow be blamed, they'll need to bear the brunt of it. There is no topic on this earth that our children should ever feel uncomfortable from discussing with us. And specifically, when we talk about issues like childhood sexual trauma, where we know that across the spectrum, children who deal with these issues feel tremendous amounts of blame and shame and guilt. And that is so often the main impediment from them speaking up. That is really the responsibility that we have as parents. And I often share with people, the following example is to kind of put it into these words. As a kid, I grew up in Salt Lake City. There weren't many Jewish kids my age here in town. And so the one exposure that I would have to other Jewish kids my age was summer camp. Every year we'd go for 2 months to summer camp. And that was really our lifeline and our connection to the world around us, to having other Jewish friends our age. And so every single year as kids, when my brothers and I would go off to camp, my parents would take us to the airport. And every single year in the car, we would have the exact same conversation, almost verbatim. And my parents would say to us on the way to the airport that when you go to camp, if there's an adult in camp, be it your counselor or any other figure of authority or any adult in camp that threatens you or intimidates you or harms you in any way or hits you or makes you feel scared, you should not feel scared of any adult that you will come in contact with in camp, because you should know that us, your parents, we are stronger and more powerful than your staff member in camp. And so therefore, if anything happens, call us up and we will get you out of there. You never need to be afraid. So if I go to camp and I'm armed with that information, and one night in camp, my counselor takes me out of the bunkhouse and separates me from the rest of the group and takes me on the bunkhouse porch and slaps me across the face and says to me that if you tell anybody about what just happened, I will slap you again. And I will slap you again and again. Every single time you tell somebody, if you do not want to be slapped, you need to keep your mouth shut. if I go back into the bunkhouse, I know what I'm supposed to do. I'm not scared of my counselor. My parents prepared me for this exact specific situation. The next morning I wake up and I get to a payphone and I call my parents and I tell them what happened. And my father comes down to camp and he, I don't know, punches this counselor in the face. And I'm going to be saved because my parents told me not to be scared of any other adult in camp, not to protect their secret. What would have happened if the counselor would have taken me outside, away from the group, and given me $100 bill and said to me, Avremi, this is your $100 bill to keep. It's a lot of money for a little boy. And you can keep this money so long as you don't tell anybody where you got it from. So long as you don't tell anybody who gave it to you, you can hold on to this money. And if you don't tell anybody for an entire week where you got this money, at the end of the week, I will give you another $100 and another $100 and so on, so long as you don't tell anybody where this money came from. When I go back inside the bunkhouse, I'm not protecting my counselor's secret. If I tell someone where I got the money from, my counselor doesn't stand to lose. I stand to lose. Now I'm protecting my own secret. I am now the biggest loser if anybody finds out about the situation, because I'm now protecting my own secret. And I will never tell anybody where I got the money from out of the concern of what will happen to me if they find out. First of all, I'm going to lose the $100. And second of all, I'm going to be the one who lost over here, not the counselor. That is our responsibility as parents. Our responsibility as parents is to create a space for our kids where there's never a topic that they should ever feel awkward, uncomfortable, ashamed, judgmental to discuss with us. We will always have their back. We will never respond with blame or judgmentalism or shame or anything of the sort. And to create that space is really our responsibility as parents.
Beautiful. As we come to the conclusion, close to the end, I'd like to know, first of all, what is your message to those or your friends? How should people, adults, respond to survivors, to somebody who's gone through this? What is the right thing to say? What is the right thing not to say?
So that's an awesome question, and one that I really like getting, because there's a lot of people that I am fortunate to work with, specifically in the observing community, who have come forward about their own experiences. And I think that there's a response that is shared so often in the Frum community, in the Chabad community, whatever it is, that is so noble and it's so beautiful and it's so well intended, but it really does a disservice to people who don't need to hear that specific message in that moment. A lot of people that I know that have come forward and shared with a parent or a rabbi or someone of that kind, that they have some sort of trauma in their past, they've been through these experiences, et cetera, et cetera. Very often the response they'll get is, don't worry about it. It's okay. It's okay. It doesn't define you as a human being. You'll go on to lead a beautiful, productive life. Don't worry about it. We love you. If it's a parent or a sibling, we love you just the same. And it's all good. Seriously, no sweat, no harm done. We still love you, and it's going to be okay. You're still a beautiful person on the inside. I think that the response like that, again, whilst being so beautifully motivated and so positively motivated, really sets people back quite a bit. And that is because for most people who are sharing this part of their lives for the first time, it's important to understand that someone in that situation has been sitting on this information for years. And for years, they've been wondering to themselves why their experiences bother them so much. Why does it affect them so much? Why can't they just live normal lives like everybody else? And then they think to themselves, well, it's probably because I went through X, Y, and Z. And then they say to themselves, the other voice in their head says, no, just get along with it. Just be normal. Don't be so moody. Don't be so hormonal, so emotional. Just be regular. Just be normal like everybody else. When they make the decision to come forward about their experiences and to share that they really have been through something which is non-typical, which is not like everybody else in the entire world, what they need to hear in that moment is, wow, thank you for sharing that. We understand that you've gone through something traumatic, and we will do whatever it is that we can to help you recover from that traumatic thing, because we understand that those experiences leave a mark on your life. And yes, you will be okay. And yes, you're still going to lead a beautiful life, of course, but not downplaying those experiences and not minimizing is so crucial for people in that moment. And again, it comes from such a positive place, and it's so beautifully motivated that I think that, if someone does disclose that information to you, and if you are fortunate to play that role in somebody's life, to be the recipient and the first recipient of that information, it is so crucial to share that message with them that, yeah, I hear you. I may not have been through what you've been through, but I understand that it leaves a mark, and I understand that you're going to get better. And I will be that supportive role in life for you to help you get to wherever it is that you need to get to.
Okay, this is my last question, and then we can open it up to the public. Anybody who wants to ask a question? My last question is, I want you to give me a Zetz now, powerful answer. Because as you said, as I heard you said, that this is you said it today. This is you feel that this is Hashgacha Pratis in a way, and it's a divine mission for you in this world. So what is the message? What is the real message you want to give from this whole situation? What is the real message?
I think my message to people is that, you know, I mentioned this earlier, and I mentioned this sometimes in the beginning, and to me it becomes so second nature that I don't even think about it. I had a pretty good idea of what my life would look like from a very young age. I was going to be a shliach. I mean, is there any greater job in the world than being a Chabad rabbi and going and putting on tefillin with men and giving out Shabbos candles and arranging Purim parties and menorah lightings and being a Chabad rabbi? I had watched my father do it, and I had gone to the kinnis every year and watched the thousands, and I was like, that's what I want to do one day. That's the greatest pinnacle of my life. And I think from a very young age, I had a very good idea of what my life would look like. Even up to less than 2 years ago, I never in a million years thought that my life would involve being an advocate for survivors of sexual abuse. And I wasn't open to that. I wasn't welcome to that. I had no interest in that being my reality. But I think that the overall, my reality, my experience, and the message which I share with people is, if you really want to make a difference in this world, if you really want to fulfill your soul's purpose in this world, if you really want to understand why your neshama came down into your body, you need to let God Almighty be the one to show you that path. Because sometimes it'll play out exactly as you expected, and very often it will play out specifically not the way you expected. And very often the difference that you will make in this world, the difference that nobody else can make in the same way that you can, will be in the realm, in the arena, in the area that you never expected. And not just never expected, that you vehemently resisted that being the reality with every fiber of your being. And I think that my experience has taught me that if I really want to be God's messenger in this world, if I really want to have a shlichus in this world, all I can do is step back and watch God guide me onto the path that He has in mind for me. Because as I've seen, the path that oftentimes God has in mind for us is not the one that we have in mind for ourselves. And obviously the one that God has in mind for us is far more profound and far more meaningful, and really is the one for you far more than any path you may have ever seen for yourself. And so I think the message, if I could leave you with one idea, the message that I leave you with, I think as human beings, all we can do in life is sit back and allow ourselves to be the Rebbeinu Shalom's Keli, to be God's vessel in this world, to figure out whatever it is He has in mind for us, and to just get along for the ride.
Well, okay, Rabbi, I hope that you're going to come again to run in a marathon, Gesundheit, and you'll I don't know if they're doing the marathon these days, but in Mitzvah, when the marathon goes again, because I think you're gaining some weight from the, so you need to come and run again in the marathon. Thank you very much. As I said, every time I hear you, I'm inspired. You're just an unbelievable person, and the Eibusher should give you should go from strength to strength.
Amen. And
continue to inspire Yidden and to do good things in life. So now, Rabbi Kramer, I'm leaving it up to you to run this show of asking the questions, but I don't know.
How it works right now is I've allowed everyone to, I didn't unmute everyone, but I've allowed you to unmute yourself. We'll do one at a time. Nechama has been waiting, seems to be a while waiting for a question. Nechama, you seem to be already unmute.
Kramer, can I just jump in just for a second before we start with the questions? I want to just let everybody know I have a specific email address, not my regular Chabad address on the Chabad server. I set up a specific address, which is specifically for conversations like these and topics like these. If everybody wants to reach out in person, continue the conversation somewhere a little bit more private, I just put the email address in the chat. Please feel free to shoot me an email. It's specifically for this reason. If anybody has questions, thoughts, comments, whatever it is, please feel free to reach out in private if there's something that you think might be better shared in private than in a public setting. Sorry for cutting you off. Let's get into it.
No problem at all. All
Okay,
right.
thank you so much. That was part of, because I'm a wellness coach, and I just got a client who shared with me that he was highly abused by his stepsister and brother. So I wanted him to be able to speak with you, and he's struggling with his Judaism, and I think, you could help him. The other question I had is, like, I suggested to him that he do some kind of PTSD therapy. Is there any kind of PTSD therapy that you feel is the most effective for dealing with this issue?
I personally have not tried EMDR. I know that a large number of trauma survivors who go through EMDR find it very, very helpful, especially in situations where the abuse that they suffered was at the hands of a loved one and someone who they continue to be exposed to throughout their life, and to be able to see that person again in a healthy setting. I know the EMDR obviously is very highly recommended. I know that a lot of trauma survivors do well with CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. I mean, I think that above all, people need to feel that there's a way for them. And I try very, very strongly to stay away from telling people this is the path, this is the way to do it, this is the playbook. I know so many different survivors, and each one has gone through their own remarkable journey. And so, there really is a dime a dozen ways to go through this. I know EMDR is very, very highly recommended, but I think above all, the most important thing is that a person feels and gets the sentiment from those in their corner that they have the freedom and the ability to go through this in a way that works for them at their own pace, doing their thing, and they really have that freedom.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
All right.
Edie Berg, you want to ask your question?
You're
Yes, I do. I wanted to know, he said he had several siblings, and I have a friend who was abused, and she never even knew that her other sister was also abused until maybe 30 years later. I was wondering if he was the only child that the woman did this to, or were the other siblings involved and too afraid to speak, or why he was chosen?
Good question.
Thank you.
One that I get often. To date, no one else has come forward having been abused by my abuser. In addition to sitting for our family, there were 2 other families that she sat for as well. And to date, no other victim has come forward. As I often tell people, if you ask 100 child psychologists or 100 behavioral psychologists, they'll tell you that behavior is actually quite common, that predators latch on to a victim and then they don't look for other victims. If you ask another 100 behavioral psychologists, they'll tell you that behavior is quite uncommon. Whether it's by the book or not, those were my experiences, and that's that. But no, to date, no one else has come forward.
Thank you so much. It really was a very informative program.
Thank you.
Lauren, you can unmute if you want, or.
Okay. Hey, how are you? Thank you for speaking. I commend you on speaking up and just doing everything you're doing. I think it's so amazing. So I actually had the same question as her. And I was thinking more on the lines of, did they ever ask the person who did it why she picked you, or why she didn't do it to more people, or, you know what I mean? Like, why you stood out to her? Like, was it your innocence? Like, why?
Sure. No, great question. To date, my abuser vehemently denies any wrongdoing. And just to kind of share with you why that's even more outrageous. When I went to the police shortly after spending Shabbos in West Boca, I had an interview with the detective from Sex Crimes, and he told me, he heard me out, and I told him the entire story from beginning to end. And he says, I trust you, I believe you. The problem is that there's not a single witness that can corroborate your story. There's no hard evidence. There's no forensic evidence. He says, we're going to do what we can, and we'll do what we can, but you need to understand this case is a long shot. And he called me back a few months later and he said, I'm working on your case. And what we do often in situations like yours is we'll set up a pretextual phone call. Would you be comfortable calling your abuser? on a recorded line. Salt Lake State of Utah's one-party consent. You can record a conversation without the other side knowing, and it's admissible as evidence. Would you be comfortable calling your abuser and speaking with her about your childhood and getting her, at least bringing up the conversation, and she would, the goal for a conversation like that is a non-denial in police terms. And so, if you speak to someone and say, hey, you remember that murder you committed behind the dumpster, and they don't say, what are you talking about? That's already something that they can go on. So they asked me if I'd be comfortable doing that. And I said, sure. I went into the police station. This was 2 months after the Miami Marathon at this point. I spoke to my abuser for about 45 minutes by phone. And we got a lot more than a non-denial. She spoke openly and very, say almost proudly, about everything that had happened, throughout my childhood. And they brought her in the next day. They interviewed her, they confronted her with the recording. She admitted, she downplayed it a little bit at that point, but the point is that they went to trial with a confession in the bag. And throughout trial, my abuser's position was the cell phone reception was choppy. She didn't hear the questions on the phone call. And when the cops were questioning her the next day, she didn't understand English. And, at her sentencing, when she had the opportunity to admit to her crimes and to ask the judge for a lesser sentence, she told the judge that she thought the phone call was a joke because it was shortly before April 1st. She thought it was kind of a preview to an April Fool's joke. So point being, no one has had the conversation with my abuser why she did what she did, because to the best of her opinion, she didn't do what she did. And so that's something which I guess we'll never know.
Is she a mom? Does she have her own
She's
children?
a mom. She's a mom. My abuser is 70 years old. My abuser had a spotless criminal record. She's a mother of 3 and a grandmother of 10, and she could have gone from her criminal trial where she was facing 7 felonies into a grandmother of the year pageant, and wouldn't have missed the beat. That's that, and that's the nature of the case. And obviously, it made it a little bit more complicated and complex, but it is what it is.
Well, I just want to say again, I'm so proud. You don't know me from a hole in the wall, but I'm proud of you for speaking up and standing up. And I think it's so important that we look, every one of us, like you said earlier, has our own story and our own experience. And we can either choose to keep it to ourselves or we can help others in the process, because there are others who are going through what we're going through. So in different ways, but yeah. And then also one more question. You met Elizabeth Smart. Was she like a really helpful person in this process? Like, she's somebody who I remember when her story happened and I followed it all along. And so I was just curious.
So Elizabeth Smart grew up 8 minutes from my house. I'm a year and a half younger than her. When she was kidnapped, none of us, no child in the city slept for a week. This is the terror that every child has, that someone's going to take them out of their bed in the middle of the night, and your mommy tells you that's impossible. And it happened. I could see her house from my window. And so it was surreal meeting her. She was the face that was on every lamppost for 9 months. And Elizabeth Smart is by far one of the most remarkable human beings I think anyone will ever have the chance of meeting in their lifetime. Her just human spirit and her ability to understand what has happened to her and to use that as a motivation for good has definitely been one of the most motivating and inspiring things that I have gone through. And she's become a tremendous mentor to me, which I'm deeply grateful for. And yeah, I'd say that meeting her and seeing how she conducts herself and processes what happened to her has definitely been a guiding light for a lot of what I hope to do.
That's so cool.
Thank you.
Of course, thank you.
I actually want to jump in here for a second with a question. Have people that you knew and were unexpected reach out to you with their stories since you've gone public?
Short answer is yes. I mentioned earlier that before I came forward, I was pretty much convinced I was, the only Chabad guy in the world that had gone through this, I should say. And I remember when my story was published around 5 o'clock Utah time. By the time I went to bed that night, like probably half a dozen other families had reached out. I was like, wow, I'm not alone. This is this is what I wanted to know my entire life. And that was really encouraging and validating. as the days went along, it quickly went from encouraging and validating to really sad. This is a very prevalent issue in our community, and this is a very prevalent issue in every single community in the world, and every single group of people in the world, period, full stop. It doesn't matter what God you believe in and what God you pray to, or if you don't believe in a God. The sexual abuse is a global pandemic. And so, yes, sadly, I've met a lot of people along the way who, has happened to you. Well, it happened to you too. There have been a lot of those stories. And as I mentioned earlier, I think it really molds you into a more understanding human being. You really begin to grapple with and to understand that everybody in life has their thing which they're going through.
All right. Does anybody else have any questions for Rabbi Avremi for Rabbi Bookett sums up?
I'm just curious, Rabbi, did anyone else, I think you mentioned other people came out against her. Is that what you said?
Not against her, no.
You were the only person who persecuted?
Yes.
Prosecuted against her?
Yes.
Wow. So brave. You're amazing.
Hi, I want to say two things. I want to commend you for doing what you've done, because I know personally how important what you've done is. It's very sad that it does happen in the frum community, to both men and to both boys and girls. I have several questions. I'm asking from a teacher's point of view. How do teachers not pick up with, for anyone that goes through abuse, the subconscious comes into play. How are you able to do that, to hide, to just control it, especially not so much as an older child, but as a younger child?
So don't forget, I wasn't going to school. I wasn't, I was around my parents and my siblings and my abuser all day. I wasn't going to school. I wasn't interacting with classmates. I wasn't interacting with, my mother is actually is a trained and accredited teacher, but it's different when she's your mother. I didn't have, teachers and coaches and other professionals that children usually are exposed to who might be able to pick up on that. So yeah, that's probably a contributing factor.
Even your mother, okay, so I forgot that you were homeschooled, but even as a mother, how are you so strong to, I don't know if it's strong, it is strong, but to withhold the emotions that come out? I had to deal with it in different ways also. And I had to deal with it with a child in a yeshiva who the parents didn't believe. And I think it's just remarkable, because what I learned from being in the frum world is that you don't talk about certain things. And if you hide it under the carpet, it's going to go away. And you've proven that to be wrong. So how do you deal with the people who don't want to deal with it in the frum world?
So there's a lot of questions in there. I think I'm going to start with the end, and then if I haven't addressed one of your points, feel free to jump me back to it. How do I deal with people who don't want to deal with this issue? I'm going to say something which may come across as a little bit condescending, or it might sound a little sad, and please know I don't mean to be negative about this. I feel that people who believe that this issue doesn't exist in whatever community, in the Chabad community, in the Satmar community, in the observant community, in the Muslim community, in the Catholic community, whatever community, anybody who has an opinion that this is an issue that does not affect their specific group of people means they have not been affected by it yet. I think that for people who haven't experienced, if people who believe firmly that this doesn't exist in their community, it means that they haven't confronted it. I believe that it didn't exist in our community. I believe that I was the only human being alive that was going through this. And for somebody that has the luxury, in a certain sense, of saying, this issue doesn't exist in our community, God bless you that you have the ability to fold your arms across your chest and sit back on your couch and say, we're immune to this. what should I say? You're fortunate you haven't come across it. But, I think that more and more as people are encouraged to speak out and as that becomes the attitude in our community, I think that attitude will fall by the wayside because, it's something which you cannot ignore once it hits you in the face. And so, I think that that's something that we're learning as a society. I think that the world at large is having that realization that this is something which affects so many people on so many levels, and it's so prevalent and it's so common. And the sooner that we wake up to that reality, the more empowered we are to help people deal with it.
I'm just curious, Rabbi, are you aware of any why it happened? Why you woke up? You said you got depressed at some point. Like, do you know what happened?
What was the straw that broke the camel's back?
Yeah.
So I'm sure any therapist or wellness coach can sit and think about it for a while. As I think about it personally, I think a large contributing factor was fatherhood. My son was born in the summer of 2015. And I know personally that becoming a father, becoming a parent is a huge adjustment in life. And I know that there's this global experience, this human experience when you hold your child for the first time, and obviously the child is squalling, and there's not a lot of intelligent conversation that goes on in that moment. But I think that every parent alive has gone through that moment where their baby looks at them, and you kind of make eye contact with your child for the first time, and you almost feel that your child is processing and understanding, I am your parent, and I will be the strongest and most dominant force in your life. I will protect you. I will be there for you. I will be the ultimate human being in your life. I think that becoming a father and having that moment with my son, holding him in the hospital, that really, threw me for a loop, because, the degree of self-loathing and the degree of lack of feeling comfortable in my own skin that I felt at that moment, and to have to fill that role for a child to be, the ultimate strong, dominant human being, that was something that I was absolutely not up for. And I think that, if I had to look back at the totality of my experiences, what led it to happen, and specifically at that point, I think fatherhood plays a very large role in that.
Yeah, thank you.
I want to just say really quickly, before you brought up two things, and then that question that other person asked regarding if it happens in the community, in the Jewish community, in the Orthodox community. I'm not Orthodox. I've always belonged to Chabad. Shana is a very good friend of mine, and Moshe. My family is a direct descendant of the Baal Shem Tov, and I'm very spiritual. I'm not as religious when it comes to the way I live my lifestyle, but I think it is so important.
I disagree. You're very religious.
I think it's so important that we teach all of our children how important it is to speak up. And you mentioned it earlier. And just to have a voice. Like right now, you're having a voice. Like, how powerful is that? And yeah, is it embarrassing at times? I'm sure. And this journey it's not over for you. It's just starting. And like, you're speaking up, and the more you're going to speak up to more people, you're going to be approached by different opinions, right? And that's just part of it. But it's all about the healing process. And I think it's so important that I have an 8-year-old and a 6-year-old, that we give them that voice to know that there is no wrong thing to say ever. And that you always should speak up, and you should always have a safe person to speak to. And I think those are so important. It doesn't matter what community we come from, what religion. I think as a whole, our world needs it really badly. Our world needs that freedom of being able to say what we're going through. I've never personally gone through what you've gone through, but I've gone through trauma. And let me tell you, I write children's books, which I actually want to send your kids as like a little thank you for speaking. But a book came out of my trauma. I wrote a book about the light within us. And like, I just feel like we need to find that always, that there is a reason for everything. And it might be sucky and it might be horrible, but there's a reason why you went through it. Okay. And not your siblings, because you are speaking up and you're making a change right now.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. I guess there's one thought that I'd share with you, because, this, I think this is a huge misconception that comes up so often. It's no secret, and it's well documented. I was very deeply impacted by the Me Too movement, right? So the Me Too movement kind of hit the world in 2017, and I very closely watching the whole USA Gymnastics story, and they were a very large decision, motivating factor in my decision to go to the police. I think there's a big misconception in the world about the Me Too movement. I think people see the Me Too movement and they think, oh, wow, look how rampant sexual abuse is. Look how rampant sexual assaults are recently because everyone's talking about them. That's not true.
Yeah.
The Me Too movement isn't saying that there's a lot of this behavior happening recently. The Me Too movement is saying that this behavior has been happening in our world for generations. It's as old as humanity. And the women who came out to the Me Too movement and the brave souls that have told their stories as a result of that are not speaking about stories that happened last week, last month, a couple months ago. We're speaking about people who endured these horrors decades ago, generations ago. What's changed is the world is ready to hear it now. People feel comfortable embracing their trauma now. And so it's not about the fact that this action is happening so much as that the world is ready to hear about things that have happened decades and decades and decades ago. And so, people say, well, isn't it accurate that because of you, there's, there are so many more reports of sexual abuse in our community? Isn't that a bad thing? No. Because all those instances are still happening, and they happened in the past. Just because a light gets shown on them doesn't make them more real. It makes the world ready to hear their story, and it gives the people who went through those experiences the freedom to speak about them. It doesn't make those things happen. Those things sadly have been happening, and it's as old as human nature itself. And so I think that really is, the torch that gets passed from one person to the other. And, if one person feels that bravery and inspires another person to feel that bravery and so on, that really is all we can do as human beings, to keep that chain alive.
Yeah.
There's a question on Facebook that somebody asked that I want to, can you share how you have been able to put this behind you? This is what the person's asking, and be in relationships without letting it affect those relationships.
Spoiler alert, you don't really put it behind you. And I think that's an important, it's an important point to recognize. Usually this comes up in the speech itself, but I'll share this episode with whoever is left. When I went to see that therapist for the first time at my wife and mother's insistence and father's insistence, I went to him, I sat down, I told him I was not very happy to be there. I was not there, willingly, it was somewhat reluctantly. And we sat down and we started schmoozing. And I have to say, it was far better than I expected. And we had a very productive conversation for about an hour. And so at the end of the hour, I turned to him and I said, listen, doctor, I appreciate your time. Thank you very much. This was a very informative conversation. I actually enjoyed it. How many more times do you want to see me? And the sentiment that I was, sharing with him was, what's it going to take for you to tell me that I'm all better? I want to get a doctor's note that says, I saw Remy and I saw him 4 times in the span of a few months, and I gave him a book to read, and he is all better. He can go back in the game now because his boo-boos have been fixed. And, nowadays, when someone sustains a physical injury, we go to a doctor, the doctor lays out a course of treatment, we have a procedure, we take some medication, physical therapy, and then God bless you, I go my way, you go your way. We don't want to have long-term relationships with our healthcare providers. And so that's what I was asking him, like, how long is our relationship going to be? And he looked at me and he says, why don't you come back next week and we'll pick it up from there. And in the message that he was, sharing in that moment, and when I still speak to him regularly, is this is not really something that you get treatment for and you're all better. Or to paraphrase the question from Facebook, you put it behind you. You continue to deal with it. You really continue to deal with it on a regular basis. You have good days and you have better days, and you soldier on, and you try to arm yourself to the best of your ability with the tools to deal with things on a regular basis and to be a healthy and happy and functioning human being. But this is something that you carry with you forever, and it does impact your relationships. I'm not going to lie and say it doesn't. It does impact your relationships. It impacts every facet of your life, and you learn how to get comfortable with that.
All right. Rabbi Bookit, Rabbi Bookit, you're on mute. Would you like to?
Yes, okay. I think you covered all bases about Remy. It's just been wonderful. I really appreciate all the people, the statements and the questions, and really it was a great evening. I really appreciate it, and I hope in Mitzshem, when this whole COVID thing comes to an end, you'll come and speak.
Yeah, that's
at our community. I think it'll be an honor. Will be powerful, more powerful. But it was really a powerful evening. I really appreciate it. And
thank you.
Thank you very much.
Love you, and
Thank
we
you.
wish you only the best, and the Abba should continue to go from strength to strength as you deal with this.
Amen. Thank you very much.
Shana Tova, Masukah, Remy, and say my best to your father.
Good Gebanch Jar. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. Have a wonderful and beautiful evening. A good Chodesh.
Good Kodesh. Thank you.
Good Shabbos to everybody. Thanks, Lee.
Thank
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye, Lisa. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.